Naturally, it's very hard to accurately predict how many games each and every NFL team will win in a given season. Of course, you might get a couple, but football is so incredibly unpredictable. However, you can very well have a range on how many games a team will win. So in this video, that's exactly what we'll do, giving each NFL team a floor and a ceiling for their 2024 records. Starting right away with the San Francisco 49ers, floor is 10-7 and ceiling is 15-2. This is probably the best roster in the NFL, so even a Super Bowl hangover wouldn't really impact them that much. This is a really good team, and barring any major disaster, they are pretty much a lock to have a winning record. On to the Panthers, their floor is set at 116 compared to a 6-11 ceiling. They won 2 games last year, so it's not like they can get much worse. I gave them a somewhat solid ceiling because if Bryce Young is able to take the next step, then they'll be able to at least win a couple more games. Up next are the Packers with an 8-9 floor and a ceiling of 13-4. They could regress, although unlikely, that's why the floor isn't that low. But when it comes to the potential this team has, they may as well be in contention for the number 1 seed in the NFC if they play their cards correctly. Now for the Titans, floor is at 5-12 and the ceiling is at 9-8. I don't feel like this team has the players to be anything more than mid. They could make some noise to potentially sniff the playoffs, but I find it hard to believe they'll surpass 9 wins. On to the Baltimore Ravens, 10-7 floor with a ceiling at 13-4. They have an incredibly solid roster, which is why the floor is that high. They have the potential to be the number 1 seed in the AFC once again, but I cannot give them more than 13 wins with how tough their division is. Moving on, the Broncos get a 3-14 floor paired with a 7-10 ceiling. They are in a terrible situation and they're looking like the worst team in the division. They could maybe end up in the middle of the pack, but they will most likely not finish with a winning record. Up next, the Rams find their floor at 9-8 with a 12-5 ceiling. They are a solid team and I think they are 100% getting a winning record. I could see them making some noise in the division, but ultimately nothing special. On to the Giants, 4-13 floor with a 9-8 ceiling. They could very well fight for one of the few wildcard spots. However, there's also the chance they regress and have an even worse record than they did last season. Now for the Bills, floor is at 7-10 with the ceiling at 12-5. They lost a lot of important players, which is why the floor is that low despite them winning 11 games last season. However, with Josh Allen at QB, anything could happen and they may as well repeat as division champs next season, we'll see. Moving on, the Texans have a 9-8 floor paired with a 14-3 ceiling. Their floor is pretty much a coin toss for a wildcard spot in the playoffs, but if they actually put to good use all their new weapons, they could even manage to finish at the very top of the AFC. On to the Commanders, 12-15 floor and an 8-9 ceiling. Chances are they'll start a rookie quarterback, which brings a lot of uncertainty to the table. They could get even worse, or if it works out, they could potentially improve and be in the middle of the pack. Up next are the Steelers with a 9-8 floor and a 13-4 ceiling. Look, if they won 10 games with Pickett, Trubisky and Rudolph, they can 100% get a winning record with Wilson and Fields. If they explode their full potential, they can definitely win the division, but there's still the chance they just barely sneak into the playoffs. Now for the Detroit Lions, 10-7 floor with their ceiling at 14-3. Even if they regressed, I don't see them winning less than 10 games. And when it comes to their ceiling, well, with this roster, they might as well finish as the number 1 seed in the NFC next season. Moving on, the Patriots get a 116 floor and a 7-10 ceiling. There's a real possibility they regress so much they become the worst team in the league. However, they had a really solid draft, which may as well help them to somehow manage to get a couple wins here and there. So that's why the range is so wide open for them. On to the Cleveland Browns, 8-9 floor with a ceiling at 13-4. Deshaun Watson could be the one liability holding this team back all the way to a losing record. However, this is still such a solid roster and their ceiling is really winning the division altogether. Up next, the Buccaneers get a 7-10 floor alongside an 11-6 ceiling. I think they will stay afloat near the middle of the pack, as it wouldn't be a surprise to see them win fewer games than they did last year. However, it would also make some sense if they were to win a couple more. Moving on, the Dallas Cowboys get a 10-7 floor with the ceiling at 13-4. They didn't improve a lot, nor did they regress that much. For that reason, I have them with a relatively small margin here, since I think they'll have a similar season in 2024 than last time around. Now for the Chargers, 4-13 floor with an 8-9 ceiling. Even though they lost a lot of players, it can't get much worse than last year, and they also made a few solid moves in the offseason that went under the radar. They could potentially get near a winning record, but this roster is just not good enough for a playoff push. Up next for the Colts, 7-10 floor and an 11-6 ceiling. Their floor isn't really that low, but it's below a winning record given the risk of having a young QB like Richardson. However, this is a really good team and it wouldn't be surprising at all to see them reach 11 wins next season. On to the Jets, floor is at 7-10 with the ceiling at 12-5. Considering Aaron Rodgers is back, their floor is quite literally their last season's record. And when it comes to their ceiling, they could potentially fight for the division, even though I think it's rather unlikely they do so. Moving on, the Minnesota Vikings floor is at 3-14 with an 8-9 ceiling. With Kirk Cousins out of the building, it would surprise nobody if they were to win less than 5 games. But hey, they may as well hold on and still stay near a winning record, even though this will most likely be a painful season for the Vikings. Now for the Eagles, 13-4 ceiling, 9-8 floor. With this roster, I think they are pretty much guaranteed to have a winning record next season. They might find some trouble to win the division, but in terms of potential, they could very well win 12-13 games. On to the Atlanta Falcons, 7-10 floor with a ceiling at 12-5. With all the improvements they've made as well as the ones probably yet to come, I think last season's record is their floor. Meanwhile, they could turn out to be a really dangerous team, having the potential to even win their division by a large margin despite not having an amazing draft. Moving on, the Raiders get a 6-11 floor with a 9-8 ceiling. This team just seems made to be in the middle of the pack. They are not terrible, but they also have nothing that leads me to believe they'll be a contender next season either. Up next are the Seahawks with an 8-9 floor and an 11-6 ceiling. They have a really solid team, which leads me to believe they'll most likely finish with a winning record. I don't think they will win their division, but they could potentially get a good seed in the playoffs. On to the Cincinnati Bengals, 9-8 floor and a 13-4 ceiling. They still have a really good team, and it's very hard for me to believe they'll have a losing record next season. Winning the division is their upper limit, and honestly, I think they can easily get into the playoffs if they stay healthy. Now for the Bears, 5-12 floor with the ceiling at 11-6. Starting a rookie quarterback is always risky, but it may come with a big compensation. They may end up as a bottom team with a losing record, or maybe they can exploit all the young potential they have and even compete for the NFC North crown right away. Moving on, the Cardinals have their floor set at 3-14 with the ceiling at 8-9. They can't get much worse than last year, so there's their floor. If they manage to exploit all the talent to perfection, they really could get near a winning record, even though I just don't see them getting that close to the playoffs. On to the Jaguars, 7-10 floor, 12-5 ceiling. This is a tough division, and if they get caught lacking, they may get a losing record. However, with Trevor Lawrence at quarterback, it wouldn't be a surprise to see them miraculously steal the division in 2024. Now for the Saints, floor is at 6-11 and the ceiling at 10-7. They just didn't make any meaningful improvements, and nearly all their divisional rivals did. They are set to regress in 2024, even though there's still a slight but existing chance they get a winning record. Moving on, the Kansas City Chiefs have a 10-7 floor paired with a 13-4 ceiling. They can always regress since they are at the very top, but they are definitely getting into the playoffs. Their ceiling may not be an undefeated season, but I think they'll be happy if they get the number 1 seed, which is certainly realistic. Up next, the Dolphins get an 8-9 floor with their ceiling set at 12-5. They have a very talented roster, but a good team can always come up short of expectations. However, they can also reach them and be great, so I have the Dolphins hanging in there most likely with a winning record and another playoff appearance next season. And so, let me know down in the comments what you think is your team's floor and ceiling. Thanks for watching, and hopefully you stick around to see more of my videos.